Or financial services in cities, internet connectivity has long ceased to be a luxury but a necessity. The challenge has always been the price of using the internet. In some parts of Africa, prices have come down. Now rural communities have access to high-speed broadband, eliminating the burden of travelling long distances just to make a phone call or to look for jobs. Joining us from our Durban studios to talk about internet connectivity on the continent and its benefits is senior Telecoms consultant Tim Parle. Tim, welcome. Good to have you on the programme.
Good morning, Leanne. Thank you.
This is a conversation close to all of our hearts, no doubt. I mean, these days, not having internet connectivity is, I can't actually draw an equivalent. It's almost like having an empty fridge. We're lost without it. Our lives come to a standstill. How are we doing in terms of access for all?
Leanne, we've made great strides. Africa is the region that's growing the fastest in the world. We're starting off a low base, as the consultants like to say, but made tremendous strides. There was a study last year by the International Telecoms Union, and they said that we had about 150 million internet users. And the good news is that South Africa is one of the highest rates of penetration. It's still growing. It's going to get to about 20% in a few years' time.
Good. Well, I mean, it's a good thing. We need to get it. We need to get it faster. I mean, low internet prices haven't just assisted businesses, but locals in rural areas. How has this technological advancement actually changed people's lives?
There are some great examples that come out. One that I've heard cited quite often is to do with fishermen on the coasts of East Africa, that they've been able to use some communications technology. It might be simple SMS technology, it might be something more sophisticated, but to be able to understand the price of the fish at the different markets up and down the coast, so they don't know where they can take their catch to get their best price. Heard other examples, tomato sellers and all sorts of people just knowing where to get the best value for selling their produce. That's one area. The other area is always of training. People are able to gain more information on how to be more productive and how to do things better.
Well, let's talk about the fact of price now, because in South Africa, I mean, we're all complaining that our data costs, our internet connectivity seems to be a lot more expensive than the rest of the world. I mean, perhaps even the rest of the continent. Give us an idea. Put us in perspective.
Well, Leanne, the best metrics I've got are from research that I was reading over the weekend, and it's really more to do with voice calls because it's a more even thing to be able to test across the continent. South Africa at the moment, we've seen great strides. We've seen the drop of gigabytes of data drop tremendously in the last few years. If we look at that basket of voice calls, we're currently about 14th out of around 50 African countries.
Yeah.
Kenya is the country that has had some of the lowest prices for a long time. And to just give you an example, the cost of a call in South Africa is about twice that of a call in Kenya. But then some of our other neighbours, it's tremendously more expensive. Angola is one of the most expensive countries on the continent.
So that's, I mean, okay, I suppose that's putting it in perspective, but you're talking calls. Let's talk data.
So, yeah, data calls have dropped tremendously. If I can give some examples, just in the South African context, there's three main types of data. We've got fixed broadband data, we've got mobile data, and we've got satellite data. And fixed data, that's costing us around about 12 Rand a gigabyte these days. If you take an ADSL package and you look at the line rental and you add it all up. So if you take 12 Rand, that's about a bottle of Coke. Mobile data is a bit more expensive than that. It's dropped to around about 50 Rand a gig. It was well over 200 Rand a couple of years ago. But it's all settled, taking the promotions and the specials out of the equation, it's about 50 Rand a gig. Satellite communications, which is particularly important for rural citizens, a year or two ago would have cost you 300 Rand a gig, and now we're seeing prices around about 75 Rand a gig.
Okay.
And there are also wireless internet service providers who are able to challenge those prices. So it's definitely prices have come down. They may have settled down for a while. Some of the operators may be complaining that they're getting too low, but yeah, it's been a very dynamic market.
It can never be too low. It can never be too low. The amount of surfing we do and the amount of data we use, goodness me, and it goes so fast. That's the reality. I mean, we're getting so many complaints these days. And you look at our cell phone operators, I think they're getting under a lot of pressure from consumers saying, I top up, I've got so many gigs, and not even halfway through the month, and I've got nothing left. So yeah. Yeah, I don't think it can ever be too cheap.
No, well, this is where the operators are hurting, though. They reckon if they're selling it at cost or even below cost, that's not a sustainable business. They've lived very nicely off voice calls for a good while. They've been used to nice high margins, and I think they've just got to get used to a new world with lower margins and see how they can squeeze more out of equipment and more out of services.
Yeah. All right, let's have a look at Kenya, because, I mean, that for me is it's an interesting case study. It's one of those countries that have shown great strides coming up with centres like iHub, and they're now building the Konza Techno City. What are they doing there that's causing them to get so ahead?
They've just managed to get the right business culture, for one thing, and the other part is that their regulator, the CCK, seems to be extremely dynamic and working very well with business, and they just seem to understand each other. They're prepared to make bold moves. We saw some major developments a few years ago with the rollout of optical fibre ahead of other countries in the continent. There is recently a very large data centre, an open access data centre being built in Nairobi, I think the largest of its kind. And these are all things that work together and surrounded by an enabling policy that allow the advancement of telecommunications.
Now, I mean, if you were to rank countries according to internet accessibility and advancement, which countries do better? I mean, let's talk outside of the continent.
Outside of the continent?
Yeah.
Well, globally, the leaders, South Korea is the example that everybody likes to cite.
Okay.
This was a country in the 1980s that decided to bootstrap itself and educate its people. And they invested heavily in optical fiber and internet technologies, and they just have the best and the fastest services. Whenever you look at a study, they're always the ones that come out top.
Yeah.
Beyond that, there are some unusual countries, really. Estonia ranks very highly. Again, a small country that just decided they needed to do something special, and they realized there would be an economic benefit by investing in internet and broadband, and they've put their money where their mouth is, and it's starting to yield benefits for them.
Fantastic.
The Nordic countries are extremely high, and generally ahead of most of the large nations.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. Let's talk about fibre. And 3G and LTE here in the country. I mean, wherever you go, and I'm talking about here in the Johannesburg area. I mean, lately I'm just seeing roads being, I suppose, dug up so that they can put fibre optic and all of these things. I mean, it is happening, and it's happening at quite a fast rate. Talk to me about that. How is that improving the lives of people?
It's really changed the market. Our local telecoms market has really taken a big change with the opening up of the fibre market. There is a particular open access service provider who has about 8,000 kilometres worth of fibre, and their services are available to all licensed operators. And now we're getting a lot of the mid-sized companies, ISPs and telecoms companies. They can lease fibre, they don't have to build their own, and they can put it together with their other equipment and establish their own networks. And so we're seeing a real emergence of a second tier of operators beyond the big names, the big household brands. There are also several very important municipal projects in the city of Johannesburg, city of Tshwane, eThekwini, city of Cape Town, have all invested heavily in optical fibre in the last few years. We calculated recently that there's about 20,000 kilometres worth of metro fibre. And that's the distance that if we walked from Cape Town to Europe, that's about 20,000 k's, if I remember correctly.
Sure. That is huge. That really is huge. If we look at rankings, which is something we've been talking about for a while now, according to the Africa rankings, South Africa is the most technologically advanced in Africa. I know that we've been speaking about price, and I know that you've given us the rationale behind it. But, I mean, when we look at the prepaid mobile broadband, our price is still a little bit higher than when we look at others. Why the discrepancy? Where is the discrepancy?
A lot of it comes to just the technical factors of, we are a physically large country. If you were to take our fibre map and you were to superimpose it on Europe, I've seen a map of this once before, and Cape Town is a sort of equivalent of Portugal, and we stretched right the way to Moscow. There are massive distances to cover. This has an impact on transmission costs and backhaul costs. And also it's just the way that our population, we're very much centred in the large cities, and we don't have a sort of village structure like you might see in parts of Western Europe. So the areas that have to be covered to provide service are tremendously large, and that comes with a large capital and operating cost to it.
Yeah.
And that cost ultimately has to be borne by the subscribers.
All right, that's really, really interesting. But just a final question. What is stalling the government in South Africa when it comes to broadband rollout?
Well, it's just understanding. We published, the government published our national broadband policy in December 2013 under the by name of SA Connect. We are looking to see the implementation plan for that. That is something that it was the Department of Communications and it's now the Department of Telecoms and Postal Services. They're yet to publish, and the industry is wanting to see that, to see an action plan that takes a policy and shows a roadmap on how it's going to be implemented. That's something that we need to see, and certainly award of spectrum, digital dividend spectrum, 700 and 800 megahertz. We're looking forward to that in the months or years to come. That process has taken a good while, but there are certainly some signs that there's going to be the right processes happening. It can be awarded, and we can move forward with that. And that'll make a tremendous difference to broadband, and especially rural broadband.
All right, let's leave it there. Tim, thanks so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. Tim Parle, Senior Telecoms Consultant, talking to us about the price of internet access, of data here in South Africa and on the African continent, and how we are doing in that perspective. But more importantly, the access to rural areas, which really is improving fast. Thanks again, Tim.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, let's move further afield now. And it seems